In March 1979, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin ended over 30 years of war between their two countries by making peace. The treaty they signed still holds to this day. But on the streets of Cairo and Tel Aviv, opinions vary between Egyptians and Israelis about the peace that has ensued.
Signing the peace treaty was necessary. We got our land back.
I know it's not the perfect peace agreement. I know the relationship between the Egyptians and the Israelis are a little bit tense.
We love peace for the sake of our children. We've had enough of war. My brother almost died in the war.
I do not believe, I would say, in the progress of the peace process. It didn't come to the normalization everybody hoped for.
There's no peace with Israel. Even after 100 years, this is a truce. A war is coming between the Arabs and Israel.
It's called peace forever. Maybe 100 years more it will be hot peace.
Egypt was insulted by other Arab countries. For whose sake? For Israel's sake? Then damn Camp David. We don't want Camp David.
I don't go to Egypt because I'm afraid of terrorists.
Reaching peace between Egypt and Israel proved a long and hard process. Sustaining that peace has also proved difficult amid the turbulence in the Middle East. On October the 6th, 1981, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat paid the ultimate price for making peace with Israel. He was assassinated by militant Islamists who, during their trial, stated they had killed their president because of the treaty he signed with Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin went to Cairo to attend the funeral of his partner in peace.
At this time of sadness, I can only say this: to Mrs. Jihan Sadat, to the children, to the President-elect, to the government and the people of Egypt. We mortals cannot find words to console you. May God Almighty console all of you in your grief.
As well as Begin's Israeli delegation, the funeral was attended by 3 former American presidents and numerous other world leaders and dignitaries from the West, a mark of esteem held for Sadat, the peacemaker. In contrast, there was no delegation from the Soviet Union, and more importantly, virtually all the Arab leaders shunned the funeral. The event highlighted Egypt's new political orientation, close to the West and outcast from the Arab world. With Sadat dead, questions arose over whether the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty would expire with him. According to the treaty, Israel was to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula, which it had captured in 1967. The Israelis had implemented the first phase of the agreed withdrawal in May 1979. Yet, by the time of Sadat's death, Israel had not yet implemented the second and final phase of withdrawal. Almost half of the Sinai remained in Israeli hands. Reports at the time showed Israeli settlers in Sinai protesting against any further withdrawal, especially in the settlement of Yamit.
Well, this area, as it's written in the Torah, which is our Bible, it says that this is Israel. It was given to us by God. It cannot be given away. You call it returning it, I call it giving it away. It's our land, and it's ours as God has commanded us to do with it, to live in it.
Begin felt the need to send a message to Mubarak to ease Egyptian concerns.
Begin asked me to deliver an oral message to President Mubarak. In spite of what he sees on television about the rejectionists in Israel who don't want to leave Yamit, etc., he said, I'll keep my taking at Camp David Accords to the iota.
Enforcing the peace treaty, Begin sent in soldiers and police to evacuate the settlers from Yamit. For their part, the Egyptians also sought to ease any Israeli fears that they would not uphold the treaty.
After I've been elected, I said that our doors are open for our friends the Arabs, but not on the expenses of our relation with Israel.
We find that President HOSNI Mubarak had done his best to maintain the same momentum, because the Israelis were under the impression that Sadat don't mean the public opinion of Egypt. And the role of President HOSNI Mubarak was to explain that there is no difference between Sadat and the Egyptian public opinion, that there is no difference between the policy of Sadat and the policy of HOSNI Mubarak. And he was successful to convince the Israeli about this.
After several months of tension on both sides, the peace treaty seemed back on track. The Israelis completed their withdrawal from the Sinai on April 25, 1982. Egypt finally regained its land and could hold its head high and show its critics that peace with Israel could bring real benefits. But the celebrations did not last long. Just 6 weeks later, in June 1982, Israel went on the offensive on its northern front. Under the command of Defense Minister Ariel Sharon, the Israeli army invaded Lebanon and advanced into the capital, Beirut. Sharon's aim was to destroy the Palestine Liberation Organization based in Lebanon and to create a new political order there. The invasion set off a chain of events, culminating in the massacre of Palestinians in the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila in Beirut by Lebanese Christian militiamen allied to Israel. The world was shocked, and there was outrage in the Arab countries. Israel's invasion of Lebanon placed Egypt in a highly uncomfortable position. Mubarak needed to respond. He did not cancel the peace treaty with Israel, nor did he sever diplomatic ties. He chose a more subtle gesture. A few days after the massacre in the camps, he called the Egyptian ambassador in Tel Aviv back to Cairo.
I'm not cutting off relations. I just withdrew my ambassador just for conciliation.
And will he be in Egypt for a long time, or will he be returning shortly?
I don't know. I'm waiting how events are going to develop.
But should the situation get much worse, should the Israelis get into more trouble in Lebanon, would you consider cutting off relationships with?
I think leave it to its time according to the events at such time.
Thank you.
The ambassador was called back for discussions. In the diplomatic arena, there are varying levels of protest. So there is a difference between calling your ambassador to return and withdrawing your ambassador, which is a much higher level of action.
We are against everything which is going on Beirut now. We are against killing these people in such a way, terrible way.
The invasion of Lebanon severely strained Egypt's relations with Israel. That strain was further antagonized by another problem, one which centered around concrete blocks that had been placed in the desert to mark the border between Egypt and Israel. There were 91 blocks from the Mediterranean coast to the Gulf of Aqaba. Egypt disputed the position of 13 of these markers. The most disputed was located at a small strip of land called Taba at the head of the Gulf of Aqaba. Israel wanted to keep this piece of land, measuring 1 square kilometer.
They insisted that they would not relinquish Taba. Maybe the other disputed areas, but not Taba. Taba had a lot of media coverage. The whole world started to know about the problem around Taba.
After 4 years of negotiations, the Egyptians and Israelis failed to resolve the dispute over Taba. Egypt pressed for international arbitration, but the Israelis were adamant about holding on to Taba.
So the question is, why did they really wanted this area? In my opinion, I think they wanted this area to make a point so that there would no there wouldn't be a precedent in which an Arab country retained back from Israel all its occupied territories.
In June 1986, despite intense protests within its own cabinet, Israel agreed to arbitration. The arbiters eventually ruled in Egypt's favor. Israel returned Taba to Egypt. The Egyptians celebrated, while those Israelis who had to leave Taba protested. The resolution of the dispute confirmed the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt was effective.
Making peace doesn't mean ending all differences and controversies. Many of them continue to exist, even after the conclusion of peace treaty. But the peace treaty says, from now on, we deal with these controversies and differences by peaceful means, by diplomacy.
By the time Mubarak raised the Egyptian flag over Taba, the dispute over the strip of land had taken 7 years to resolve. It had put extra strain on the relations between Egypt and Israel. Despite such differences, the peace treaty had proposed other ways to help the two countries promote good neighborly relations.